Good morning. So the subject of this morning's video is how to write a perfect utility statement. So first of all, what is a utility statement? A utility statement is a document which gives you a snapshot of the current state of utilities, the risks of the utilities, or how those risks are being managed. So whether that's existing services that need to be moved, existing services which can't be moved, such as things like high pressure gas mains and maybe overhead line electrics, which maybe you could move them, but it would be impractical and very costly to do so, through to how you're going to service your site with new supplies. So these documents are produced for clients to inform them about the sites that they own. So maybe they want to build some houses on these sites, and you're basically telling them what the risks are at any particular point in time. And a utility statement, outline stage utility statement, will differ from something that's, further down the line. Now, typically when you get into later design stages, you're not really talking about utility statements, you're talking about design reports that have utilities information in, but you can still provide a utility statement. It's a statement of the utilities on the site. So what does this look like in practice? So it's about 3 or 4 sections. An introduction, so you're introducing the site, the location, a red line boundary showing where the site is, coordinates, so it can be located. You've then got a section about what the actual development proposal looks like, so the sort of blurb you'd have in a planning application. We're building this many houses, mixed development, 3 form-entry primary school, commercial offices, etc. So just give a description of what you're actually doing on the site to give some context to the utility statement. And then the next section, you're dealing with existing utilities and alterations. So you would get your record mapping, so C2 searches. So this is part of the diversionary works process, C2, and you can acquire this yourself. You can go to all of the utility companies and acquire this. I would recommend you use a specialist who specialises in the procurement of this information. So there are businesses out there, these are the kind of companies that do GPR surveys, and they wouldn't have any issue providing a quote to do that. So it's a few £100s to do typically. For a typical site, it's between, £300 and £600 to do this, and it's well worth it. So they will do all of the leg work to produce this information for you. So that's PDF format. That will come in a report. It typically takes, once payment's made, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks maximum, to get that information back, and then recommended that you digitize that onto a plan. So you've got a CAD drawing of the existing utilities information that you can use in the project to coordinate with other disciplines like the architect, the landscape architect, the structural engineer, the MEP engineer, that kind of thing. So you've got your plan, you've got your existing services, you overlay your master plan, what you're planning to do. There should be some idea. If not, then in terms of working out what needs to be done to move services off the site, the best thing to do is just assume that the whole site needs to be cleared. So if you're at very early stages and they don't really know what they want to do with the site, you can just point out where the services are on the site and then get some quotations to divert all of the equipment off the site. So you do this by making applications to the affected utility companies, and at early stages you would get what's called a C3, which is a budget diversionary quotation. And if you want to look up the process, it's called the NRSWA, NRSWA, the New Roads and Street Works Act. So this is the piece of legislation that covers diversionary works. So it's the C2 or C1 to C9 process. It's basically C2 is records, C3 is budget diversionary, C4 is more formal quotations, which you tend to pay for, and then you've got C5 acceptance of the quote, undertaking the works, all the way through to C9, which is the final payment. So working out what the final bill was, and either charging the client more, or hopefully they've overestimated the costs, and actually you get a bit of a rebate back from the utility company. So that's the diversion section. And then you'll have a section on new supplies. So you'll do some loadings, some calculations based upon the benchmarks of the site. So you know it's X thousand square meters of housing, or so many units, or so many thousand square meters of commercial, and you use benchmark figures in terms of either watts per square meter or per dwelling. You can use figures per dwelling. With modern developments, especially housing developments, so there's big questions around what the actual demand is. So we're going all electric. We've got houses now with heat pumps instead of gas boilers. And there's also mandates from the government to install electric vehicle charging points. So again, all of this stuff needs to be factored in. I mean, in practical terms, and we've had documents from utility companies. I think the latest one I got was from UK Power Networks, which I can share down below in the video description. And the after diversity maximum demand of a low carbon house is not that much more than the previous estimate for a house that was heated by gas and didn't have an EV charger. So you might think, well, you just add them all up. You add up the load of the house, which is, 2 after diversity. So diversity is when you just say, well, not everyone's going to be using the electricity at the same time. So the more houses you have, the more that load, that peak load, gets spread out. And of course, with smart metering and this sort of time of use charging structures, they try and shift the demand so that it's not all happening at the same time, to try and smooth out the peaks, which serves the grid. Anyway, a low carbon house is probably, less than 4 kilowatts peak demand, including the EV charger, which is interesting. So you build up your picture of your loads, get them checked obviously, and then you're making applications to utility companies for the demand that you want. So you make your application to the electricity company, or in this case it's the distribution network operator, the DNO. So depending on where you live, it might be UK Power Networks, Northern Power Grid, formerly Western Power Distribution, which is now National Grid. So yeah, there's a few around. Make an application to them. Initially just do a budget application if it's a very outline plot. Otherwise, I would suggest you do a formal quote to get that answer, a meaningful answer from them, because electricity is in short supply, and it's definitely worth paying a bit of money, getting them to do some actual work. Otherwise, it's just a theoretical figure. They can say, well, a job of this size costs approximately this much, and therefore it's going to cost approximately this much. They haven't actually looked at anything. They haven't looked at the network. They haven't looked at how much capacity is available, etc., etc., etc. So I think it's worth, if you're looking at something more than just a speculative site, it's definitely worth getting a formal quote and paying a bit of money. It probably costs, I don't know, £2,000 to get a formal quote done, but definitely worth doing. And then, of course, you'll have your potentially gas demands, although it seems to be falling out of favour, unfortunately. So that could also be an application to the local gas company, GDNO, gas distribution network operator. So I know Cadent Gas is a big one. Wales and West Utilities is another one. Northern Gas. So there's a few GDNOs around the country that you make applications to for a gas connection. Water supply. So water is typically calculated on a population equivalent. So with houses, you could do it on a dwelling basis, but often you have a population assumption about how many people are going to be living in a house, and the same thing applies to commercial and office space. It's done on an occupancy per square metre of of the people in the building, because ultimately they're the people who are going to be using the water, whether they're using potable water or flushing toilets, using sinks, etc., and producing foul water flows. So again, your calculation spreadsheet that you'll be using, that someone in your business would have developed, will come up with those figures, and that's what you initially provide to the water company, and they'll give you a quotation for some kind of connection. Now, as you go through your design and your site design starts to firm up, so you know what you're actually going to build, how many toilets, hand wash basins, etc., will have that information you will provide to the water company, and they will plug that information into their spreadsheets and come up with their loads for what they consider to be a typical demand. And of course they know, because they've got all the data, haven't they, from all the water meters. So that's what we've got: electricity, gas, potable. We don't tend to do foul drainage. We tend to leave that to the specialist who would do the foul drainage element as part of the drainage report. But we'd also look at telecoms. So BT are obligated to provide a site with telecoms, with fibre. I think they're phasing out copper lines, telephone lines. But at the initial stages, you can just make statements about that BT will provide infrastructure to the site. And once you get past a certain stage, then you will register the site, and BT will provide you with a design with chambers and duct routes through the site to distribute to the properties. And providing the development goes ahead, then you should be fine. If you don't go ahead, then they'll probably want to recoup some costs associated with having done that work. So just bear that in mind. Don't automatically register a site, because there may be costs associated with it. Okay, so you've got your electricity, gas, potable water, and telecoms. You may have other telecoms providers in the area, and you'll work this out from looking at the record mapping. So you might have Virgin, you might have Vodafone, you might have Colt, Zayo, EU Networks, there's Verizon, there's all sorts of comms providers with infrastructure that you might be able to make use of. And this probably is more appropriate when you're talking about commercial developments. If you're building a bank in London for, JP Morgan or somebody, they may have existing agreements with these telecoms providers who do their networks for them. And they may want you to install that infrastructure so that they can continue that relationship. So yeah, that's worth checking out as well. And then once you've got all of that information back, and it normally takes about 3 months to get that information back from utility companies, you can start to compile your utility statement. So your sections are, as I said, introduction to the site, red line boundary, description of the works that you're proposing on the site. Section 2 is existing utilities and alterations, which you detail your diversion responses. So you're 3 months later when you get your responses back, you'll detail what that entails. So removing an overhead pole, undergrounding some electricity, HV or LV electricity cables, diverting a gas main, whatever it is. It might just be that you're putting some new junctions in, you're having to lower the curb, and lowering the curb means that you may have to either put some protection in for some gas or electricity cables underneath that junction, or lower them. So you'll put all that information in section 2, and then section 3 you'd have your utility loadings and new supplies. So you'd outline all of your calculations, some of the benchmarks that you've used, and then the applications you've made, responses you've got, the dates, the reference numbers, and then stick all of that information, so the record mapping, the liaison with utility companies for diversions and new supplies, stick it all in the back of the utility statement in the appendices. So also worth having a conclusion section. Depending on who you're making this utility statement for, you may want to include the costs if it's going to planning. So if this is something you're providing to your client, they will definitely want to know the costs. If it's going for planning, I would suggest that you exclude them. They often don't want people to see, the general public to see how much this stuff all costs. So they will typically want you to exclude that stuff. But we like to have two types of documents. So the first is for the client's eyes, and the second is a public document that would go on a planning portal, the council's planning portal, that the general public can have a look at. And depending on the length of your utility statement, I would also recommend you put an executive summary in. So I know there's not a lot of information there, but just give someone who can't give the time to read the whole thing, just give them the salient points for each of those services and any major risks they need to be aware of. It's just polite to give people that, so they don't have to trawl through a report. When I see a report that's got, 2 or 3 pages, I think that's okay. If it's 5, 6, 7 pages long, I would put in an executive summary, just a summary at the beginning. So summary, introduction, diversions, new supplies, maybe costs, conclusion. So you're basically telling them what you're going to tell them. You're telling it, and then you're telling them what you've told them. That's the thing, isn't it? They say tell them 3 times, and then they'll be good. And then in the appendix you'll have hundreds of pages of appendices, all the record mapping, which takes up 50, 60 pages, and then you've got your inquiries, the quotation letters you've had from the utility companies. This is useful if somebody wants to come along and pick this up later and carry on the work. They've got reference numbers they can relate to. Hello, yes, we've taken this project on now, and this is the previous reference number, and we'd like to amend this, that and the other. Here's a letter of authorization from the client. And yeah, you can just pick up where you left off rather than starting again. The main concern there is that you've got lots of people in utility companies, and the way that you integrate with them, the way that you interact with those teams is quite clunky. It's through sort of general inboxes. So trying to get hold of an individual who knows the scheme can be quite tricky. So yeah, once that's all done, PDF. And if you're putting on a planning portal, so you maybe take the costs out of it, then you'll probably have to split your document up into chunks, maximum 10 megabytes probably. So there are PDF editors that can do this. I use Bluebeam, which is quite useful, and you can chunk the document up into whatever size pieces you want, and that's quite useful. And then you can upload those onto the planning portal. It's worth saying, if you want to look at these utility statements, you can. They are available on these planning portals. So if there's a development happening and they're going for planning, or they've gone for planning and they're awaiting a decision, go and have a look. Go and have a look on their website and download these utility statements and have a read and see what you think. I mean, you can look up mine, all the ones that I haven't been involved with. So yeah, the projects I've worked on, maybe I'll put a link in the description or link you to an actual document so you can have a look at it, just to give you an idea of how it's done. I'm not saying my way is the best way. There are plenty of ways to do this, but it's just the way that we found that gives the information in the most succinct manner. We don't make statements above our level of knowledge. We don't state where we don't understand. We don't state things as a fact. So, we're quite careful about the language we use, as you should be in life. But have a look. Yeah. If you're interested, then I've created a PDF, and you can, if you click on the link below, and you can get. I'll send you that PDF, and it basically outlines all of this information, and how you construct a utility statement, and it may help you if you're looking at these documents a lot and you're hiring other people, have some idea of what sort of information you should have in your utility statement, so you can go back to them and challenge them. Or if you want to start doing this professionally, you've worked in utilities and you want to become a consultant, it's definitely worth looking at. So have a look at the link below, and I'll send you my utility statement cheat sheet. It's just a few pages long, but it gives you everything you need to know. So that's a utility statement in a nutshell. There's plenty more to talk about, but I think that'll do for now. So check out the link, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.